welcome to Tax Matters. I am Pearl Naimaka. We begin with cheering news from Revenue House in Abuja. The Federal Inland Revenue Service has released its 2018 half-year report, and the big news is that in just 6 months, the service has realized 75% of its revenue target for the entire year. In the period January to June 2018, the FIRS collected a whopping sum of 2.53 trillion naira. That figure is 42% increase over what was collected in the corresponding period in 2017, in other words, January to June. In another development, the much-awaited tax appeal tribunals have finally been reconstituted. You do know that the tax appeal tribunals, which replaced the erstwhile body of appeal commissioners and the VAT tribunals, began operating in the year 2010 and their terms expired in 2015. Information reaching us from the Office of the Federal Minister of Finance indicates that the tax appeal tribunals have been reconstituted for the 6 geopolitical zones of Nigeria and for Lagos and the Federal Capital Territory of Abuja, making them a total of 8. The TATs adjudicate over disputes arising from the operation of the federal tax laws and regulations. Each tribunal is made up of a chairman and 4 commissioners knowledgeable in the laws, regulations, norms, and practices of taxation, management, and trade. Tax Matters will bring you the full list of the tribunal members as soon as they come into hand. Last episode, we brought you excerpts from the presentation of Mr. Adekbaye, Deputy Chief of Staff to the President, at the second public lecture of the Department of Commercial and Industrial Law, Faculty of Law, University of Lagos. We did promise at the end of the episode to share with you in a subsequent episode the robust question and answer session that followed the presentation. That promise we want to keep today. But before then, these additional excerpts from the presentation on the ease of doing business.
Ease of doing business is a big deal. Some say, okay, to get foreign investors, you need to give tax incentives, you need to, even give tax waivers. Forgive if they import, let them bring it in free, encourage them to come. But studies have shown that that is not necessarily so. Rather, people want certainty. They want to know that, okay, this is the import duty, 2%, and it is that 2% I will be charged. I will be given the assessment promptly. The moment I pay, I'm able to clear my goods. So if we take care of ease of doing business, if we eliminate corruption, in the process. And as I will argue, with technology now, we can do a lot to eliminate subjectivity. And subjectivity fuels corruption. If I have a discretion, I can choose to exercise it in your favor if you pay me something under the table. But if I don't have a discretion, the assessment is automatic. Full use is made of technology. You find that we get a lot more. Even if we lower the rates, we still get a lot in terms of yield.
Now to the question and answer session.
When we talk about security, we talk about the security of life. What is the right of the Nigerian citizen whose life is not protected with respect to taxes he has paid to the government?
On the Lagos State Land Use Charge,
with respect to the agency powers or relationship between Lagos State and the local government with respect to the land use charges. Now, what is the constitutional basis for Lagos State in exacting that tax?
Land use charge, to go back to the history, is a combination of ground rent and tenement rates. Okay. At the time Lagos State government decided to intervene in it, the valuations had become obsolete. Local governments were collecting token in quote, tenement rates because they couldn't revalue properties. And they brought the cost of revaluing properties, it was huge. Incidentally, the state government also needed to revalue properties for purposes of ground rents and so on and so forth. So it was thought to take advantage of a common valuation effort. And that's how land use charge started. Okay, valuers were engaged, they started to enumerate properties. Let's even know how many properties there are, developed and undeveloped. Let us know what their current values are, and so on and so forth. And then at some point along the line, there was a consensus amongst the federal and state. They actually, state and local government, they actually signed contracts. I saw myself contracts signed by all the local government authorities and the state as to making a common charge so that you don't pay ground rent today. And then tomorrow somebody comes and say, come and pay tenement rate. It is one payment, and it is one payment that is moderated because it was relying on the mass effort, that if you take a little and you get from everybody, you get much more than you fix a high rate and you are only able to collect from a few. That was how the cooperation started, and it was agreed that state government will fund the valuation and will have a higher initial share of the revenue. I don't know what the sharing formula is today, but that was the basis of giving the government, state government, a lion's share at the time. So it is in recognition of the constitutional right of states over land, which I'm sure Professor Yowo is well aware of, and then of local governments to collect tenement rates, and both coming together to create a charge that would necessitate the property owner only paying once to one agency. And then there's a sharing formula, and the money is paid to a trustee, and the trustee has in his possession a sharing formula, and it automatically will pay all the beneficiaries under the trust. That is how the land use charge came about.
Every day, my people dey for work. Some dey do office work. Some get them own business. So all of them want good road, constant power for better life. Whether na office work, oh yeah, pay your tax. Whether na your own business, oh pay your tax. If you want a better life, oh pay your tax. Na your civic responsibility. Pay your tax. Better soup, na money cook am. Oh yes. Nothing goes for nothing, my brother. If you want potable water, security and hospital for make life jolly.
That's right. Good roads, good hospitals, portable water, adequate security all come from taxpayers' money. Play your part in making Nigeria great. Everybody, small scale, big companies, entrepreneurs, do the right thing. Pay your tax. This message is from the Federal Inland Revenue Service, FIRS.
Welcome back. More questions, more answers.
In Nigeria, religious bodies are not taxed, and yet it is seen that some of them make huge sums of money by engaging in business ventures. So won't taxation of religious bodies increase revenue for the government and the federation? Thank you.
What happens is that gifts to religious bodies, are meant because they are non-profit. And I'm talking theory now. So it's not that I don't know that the practice is different. Let me talk the theory first. They are non-profit. So it is assumed that collections made by churches and mosques will be used for the welfare of the poor, and, so they don't need to be taxed. They are more or less doing the work of government. And I know some churches are doing that. They take the welfare of their poor members very seriously. They get houses for them. They pay them for one reason or the other. That is the theory, and that's why it's not taxable. A church or a mosque becomes taxable when it does business. If, for instance, it starts a candle making business, the profit on that is taxable. There is the famous case of CMS, which had properties and let them out for rent, and the court held that those rents were taxable. So the moment the religious body goes into business, of course, its profits from those businesses become taxable. Now, how do we ensure, and that may be the real question, how do we ensure that the tax-free donations made to churches are put to good use? It is done in other places. In England, for instance, you are registered as a trust. You must render your account. Every penny you receive, you must account for. There are authorities that come to check your books. What you do with the money, you must show. I think it is that kind of regulation and that kind of monitoring that we need. Not necessarily to say our churches and mosques should be taxable, no. But we must monitor to ensure that they are accounting for the money first, because a trust is a public trust. Okay, it's not a private business. There's a tendency to take, for instance, a church or mosque as the business of the owner here, and you don't have a right to look into it. We mustn't do that. If we want to take it that way, then we might as well tax it as personal income of the owner. We know that it is his business. But if it is indeed a trust for the benefit of the public, we must have a way of checking what is going on, seeing that all monies are accounted for, and if anything is spent outside of the scope of the trust, that corrective steps are taken.
The position of the tax laws is actually that religious bodies and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, even as they are regarded as non-profit-making organizations, must file annual returns. This will ensure that their books can be examined for activities that go beyond their non-profit status. There were interventions from the audience that further amplified the issues at stake.
I have listened to very interesting questions here. My only observation is that all we are doing, we've been failing because we've never taken cognizance to our own history. The pre-colonial Nigeria was properly governed. The House of Fulani ruling aristocracy was doing well in their own. The sustainable monarchical standard of the Southwest is still working till today. Then the Igbo pre-colonial consensual democracy is even greater than that of Greek city-states. Why can't we look inwards? Why don't we share this money to the communities? The people in the community should be part of the inter-physical governmental relationships from federal to the state.
When we are looking at how do we service government expenditure in a federation, the question that comes to mind is, are we really practicing federalism? We need to restructure government expenditure. Someone said it rightly. Why should federal government be the one to be feeding primary school? That should have been the job of the local government councils. The issue of security and welfare that is in Chapter 2 of the Constitution as amended, they are cogent. And it has to belong to every segment of the society. So when people are talking about restructuring, we are not just talking about restructuring for talking's sake. We are talking about restructuring so that we can restructure revenue and restructure expenditure. For me, there are so many ways we can go about it. Servicing the people. We must first of all know who is to service who. The federal government is a central government. Nobody is living under the federal government. Everybody is living under local government and state government. So whose responsibility should it be to take care of the welfare of the community, of the state? That is crucial. Then another thing I have seen in our budget every year is that a lot of money goes into recurrent expenditure. Government must by now be able to determine how much should go for administration. It shouldn't be more than 10%. Then you can now say, okay, this will go for social welfare, education, health, unemployment services, and so on. But when we have 70% of our revenue being spent on recurrent, on the administration of government, then we have problems.
Are we really practicing federalism? That question comes up over and over again. And the approach that we had taken when in those days, when we were in Lagos State, was to actually force a reconsideration of the practice to make it fit the constitutional prescriptions, because the Constitution recognized more of federalism than we were actually practicing it. And the second logical next step would have then been to amend the Constitution. But it seems to me that we have practiced this Constitution, or we are almost set in our ways, so that if you now want to say, okay, let us restructure, it's difficult to get a consensus. Some will say, okay, we go back to regions so that we cluster the states to regions. Meanwhile, today, there is still a fight. There are people who think, oh, we need to create more states, not cluster. Just create more states. So there is a Lagoon State movement I know of in Lagos, Ekpe and Ikorodu, to become a state on there. And you cannot convince the proponents of that movement that it won't work. And remember, the last constitutional committee prescribed, I think, 50 more states, or growing the number to 50. Meanwhile, the 36 are unable to fend for themselves. So it's a complex issue, but I agree with you that we should try as much as possible to truly reflect the prescriptions of the Constitution which we purport to practice in what we do daily. The capital recurrent balance. Yes, we need to review our MDAs, we need to close some down, but it's difficult, I can tell you, because I've been involved in some of the efforts. If, for instance, today you say federal government sacks, let's even say 2,000, the hue and cry, you cannot imagine, I mean, it's unimaginable, the kind of hue and cry that will follow. Meanwhile, that should be the logical consequence. So we have to take a more gradual approach, even though it means that government is carrying some agencies and employees that it really does not need, but to get rid of them will be costlier than carrying them. So just make sure now you look at the employment and be slow with that, so that you are not replacing everyone that goes out, and you can get some trimming as we go along. But you know how difficult that is also. A lot of people are looking for employment all over the place, and if government is not employing, they feel that they've been shut out. Why is government not employing? So it's a very difficult dilemma. This government is trying very hard to ensure that when we say at least put up to 30% on capital, you may say 70 is too big for recurrent, but given the structure as it is now, given the salaries you need to pay, given the what you need to keep the government going, it's difficult to suddenly go down. You can gradually go down. But the thing is to be devoted to the portion that you said you would give to capital, which this government is trying to do. A lot have been said about the capital releases last year, up to 1.3 trillion. It was higher than in recent memory. It's because of the dedication of government to the idea of devoting money to capital. We know that is where the growth of the economy is going to spring from. And we are also keeping faith with the policy that if we do any borrowing by foreign loans, we are using them for capital projects, not just to pay salaries. So we won't go abroad and raise bonds or raise loans and then use it to pay for running costs or that. So gradually, and I think we have made a remarkable improvement along those lines. And then feeding. Why are we feeding primary schools? In all federations, there are certain policies, intervention policies, which a federal government must put in place. For instance, we have said, and the first question from Chief here raised the issue, the people that ought to see this money are not seeing it. Okay, how do we make sure that the common man, the poor man in the village, is able to benefit from government spending? And we think strategically that if you feed this 1 meal a day, one nutritious meal a day, in the primary schools across the country, if you do it, you are going to improve the health of the students, you are going to improve school enrollment, you are going to improve the economy of the local farmers, of the local cooks, the multiplier effects. I mean, you look at all that, then government can, and it happens in all federations, you can check on it. Government can decide, I'm going to intervene here. I'm going to give 5,000 minimum to the poorest of the poor in these rural communities. And I think I'm beginning to answer the questions that Chief raised earlier. That this government in particular, it hasn't really happened in such an organized way before, decided that we will have certain programs, small business people that need maybe 100,000 loan to grow what they are doing. We will take these loans to them. Okay, we will have a conscious program for growing MSMEs, micro, medium, and small scale enterprises, and we will give them support loans and so on. So there are federal grants done for that purpose. We are not taking over primary schools. Even the administration, government has been criticized for it because we insist that we will use local cooks. We are not going to say, okay, because APC is in power, it's only APC people that should bring the cooks. No. Find someone who has been feeding the children at that level before in that community. It is for the benefit of the community. So we shun all the political implications and ensure that the money gets there. And when we talk about cash transfers, it's the community itself participating in a poll to point out who is the poorest in this community, who is so poor that they can't even get 1,000 in a month. And it is the results we gather from this we use to identify these very, very poor families to which cash transfers are made. So government intervention at that level is a policy issue. It is a grant. It doesn't contradict the principle of federalism in any way.
You will agree with us that the second public lecture of the Department of Commercial and Industrial Law was indeed an intellectual feast, and we do hope that we have again on this occasion further enlarged your coast, that you're better informed on the workings of the Nigerian tax system. Before we go, more cheering news. Diligence at one's duty post is always duly recognized. The head of the Intelligence, Investigation and Enforcement Unit of the Police Command at the Federal Inland Revenue Service has been promoted to the exalted rank of Commissioner of Police. Mr. Bode Adeyinka Adeleke, who has been with the FIRS since September 2015, was recently elevated to the rank of CP and was decorated at a brief but colorful ceremony at Revenue House in Abuja.
Today is a great day, and it's my pleasure as the Executive Chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service to be able to decorate the outgoing, newly promoted Commissioner of Police. First of all, we'd like to thank you for your service. for leading a team of enforcement units, a team that has shown all dedication to service, a team that has treated all taxpayers fairly. We would like to wish you success, and we would like to decorate you with this new rank, which we pray you will wear well in the service of our dear nation. Thank you. God bless.
From all of us at Tax Matters, a big congratulations to Commissioner of Police Adeleke. And to our viewers, see you next week. Same station, same day of the week, same time of the day. Have a beautiful week ahead.